As we are about a week removed from the NFL draft, we welcome in ESPN's Kevin Seifert, who writes for the Minnesota Vikings. You're on the beat, you've covered this team, and really, you started at the same time Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell started.
I sure did. They beat me by a couple months, and I've been catching up ever since. But it's kind of neat to come in at the same time and kind of everybody learn together.
Right. It's a huge get-to-know-you process, and now we are entering the second draft class, year two for them, their second off season. What are some of the markers or tells have they shown you about how they prepare the Vikings roster? Yeah,
I mean, they think through all the options, and you would think that every team does, and I'm sure they all do to an extent. But I think sort of the scene that we saw play out on the NFL Network and later on the Vikings Entertainment Network social media clips showed just how intense it can get. They in the first round, for example, they knew they were probably going to take Jordan Addison when that number 23 spot came up. But you got 10 minutes, so let's just make sure that there's not something better out there. And so I think as the time wound down, you saw some people pacing, and you saw some things get intense. But you saw Kwesi Adofo-Mensah just making sure that somebody wasn't going to make them an offer that could blow them out of the water to an extent where they had to make the deal. And if not, they knew they were going to get a really good player. And so that to me was very instructive and something that I got a lot out of.
Yeah, you wrote an article located on ESPN.com about that. And it goes more in depth about the things that you heard that kind of revealed how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah approaches these types of things. So as far as Addison goes, why do you think they were willing to take him in the first round and not make a trade?
Yeah, I mean, number one, when you're at that spot and any first round pick, if you can get an impact player at a premium position, that's the phrase Kwesi used, and I've heard that used elsewhere. There's certain positions where running back, maybe tight end, you're not necessarily taking in the first round, but a receiver, in the way the NFL plays nowadays, with the encouraging the passing game amongst all others, you can't, if you can find somebody that, as Kevin O'Connell said, can be a day one starter in your receiving group, and they all universally believe Jordan Addison can do that, then you're gonna want to take him. And we also realize, they have a pretty good group right now with Justin Jefferson and KJ Osborne. And you say, well, is that a luxury pick? Do they need another receiver? And part of the answer is yes. Those three receivers, as they had last year, really make a difference and allow you to sort of capitalize on the sort of coverage that Justin Jefferson will get, or maybe keep him from getting quite that extent of coverage if you can utilize those players right. And the other part is, and this gets back to Kwesi, and his job is not just to focus on the 2023 season, it's 2024, 25, and so on. And you just look at on paper, and KJ Osborne is entering the last year of his contract. Who knows what's going to happen? But if he has the kind of season that the Vikings hope he can have in the role he's going to be in, and he probably hopes he can have, free agent receivers in this league get paid a lot. And the Vikings would have to, probably be in a position where they're competing with a lot of teams for his services. And if they were not able to re-sign him, you just drafted a guy who could play that spot really well. And so those are all the things you have to think about. You see it playing out in front of you, and that gives you an idea of what they're thinking about as well.
Yeah, right now it does feel like the wide receiver room has an embarrassment of luxury, right? Like you have all of these very talented players. As far as the rest of the draft class goes, taking Jordan Addison maybe off the board for this one, who's the most intriguing prospect for you from the 2023 class?
Well, it's hard to avoid any time that you draft a quarterback, and so Jaren Hall, taken in the fifth round, and normally you don't write off any draft pick, but if you're drafting a quarterback in the fifth round, when you see how they get chased so high up into the first round often, and anybody after that is a toss-up as to whether they can be a starter. Fifth round quarterbacks do not often, if ever, become. Tom Brady is the rare exception. Kirk Cousins as a fourth round pick is pretty much an exception, him and Dak Prescott. And so normally when you're talking about future starting quarterbacks, you're saying first round pick, maybe second round pick. And so he's in the fifth round, but there is so much to like about him in terms of his makeup. The Vikings talked about how they Mike Scholten, the director of college scouting, talked about how at the combine, they showed him a video of a play at BYU where they knew the receiver had run the wrong route, and they wanted to see what Jaren Hall would say about that. Some guys would sell somebody out, some guys would make something up, some guys would tell the truth. What was Jaren Hall going to say? And all he said was he would not call the receiver out. All he said was, "I got to make it right." And so gives you some insight into how teams, at least the Vikings, scouted this guy and how they rendered judgment on him. Kwesi talked about watching YouTube videos of his interviews. Not his scouting, not his actual plays, but his, just how does he conduct himself? There's no right or wrong answer, but how does he, take credit or send out blame or explain things, or how does he conduct himself? And they just love all those things about him. And so that's what's intriguing to me, is that we know that if you can't make good decisions and throw accurately, you're not going to play well at all. But you can do both of those things, and if you don't have all the other things we're talking about, it doesn't matter. And so I think at the very least we've found out that he has a lot of the leadership and character requirements for that. And so to me, that was really intriguing.
It's very telling that you can get a guy like that at that point. When you think about later round quarterbacks, so much of that is what situation are they entering? Yep. How much of an advantage does Jaren Hall have, considering, looking across the league, coming into a room with Nick Mullins, Kirk Cousins, and then, of course, your head coach being a former NFL quarterback?
I actually think that's true all the way up to the number 1 pick in the draft. Yep. And I don't, Bryce Young is the number 1 pick in the draft. If he goes to a team, and we don't know, the Panthers have a whole new coaching staff and all that, but if he goes to a team that is not ready to support a rookie quarterback, his whole career could be changed. So it's not just in the 5th round, too. And we've seen so many examples of that throughout NFL history. So where you go is almost more important than when you go, except for your pocket, your wallet, your contract changes. But, and just talking to people around the league, agents and players and all that, and there would be a lot of reasons if I were an agent or if I were a parent or if I were anybody related to a quarterback that I'd want to push that quarterback in this direction. It's not the only place that has what you talked about, in addition to the skill players that he'd be throwing to.
Right, exactly.
The Justin Jeffersons, the T.J. Hawkinsons, now Josh Oliver, the running back situation. There's just a lot of reasons, but the biggest one is when you come in to this environment this year, whether you were a 5th round pick or a 1st round pick, there's certainly no pressure on you to get on the field and have that. Most of these players have a moment or two in their careers where it's do or die. You're on the field and you either play well or you don't. And if you don't, you may never get another chance. Kevin O'Connell, as a player, a perfect example of that. Probably got on the field a little bit too early before he was ready, or got put in that situation a little too early. And so that's the best thing going for Jaren Hall, is that, probably when he gets on the field, if he gets on the field, it's going to be in a more positive situation.
Well, flipping the script, if I'm a defensive guy, I'm going to be excited to be able to play for Brian Flores and what he brings to the table. When you look at the free agency pickups, the draft picks, undrafted free agents, what kind of a player is Brian Flores looking to plug into his system?
First of all, versatile. Every DB, every defensive back that they've either signed in free agency or drafted has talked about being able to play on the outside, nickel. Jay Ward can play safety, and not just can. You hear a lot of college players saying, I can do all these stuff, but this is what they were being judged on as far as whether the Vikings wanted to bring them, was could they play all those spots? Because there's a very specific schematic reason to have the same players on the field but not know what positions, at least for the offense, was not know what positions they're going to be in at the snap. And that's a great level of flexibility to have if you have the players who can do that. And that's been one of them. The other one, another one is to have big guys that run like little guys. I think Chismopra told us about that one. And so, and that's every NFL team would love that, but I think that's something that the Vikings under Flores were really looking at is, while 40 times aren't necessarily important for defensive linemen, ability to get where you're supposed to be faster than where the offensive linemen can get there is huge. And so that was what they were looking for at those. So those are two characteristics I think that were pretty thematic throughout the draft.
Well, Kevin, we appreciate you joining us here. I know that we had press conferences with some of the vets earlier today. We'll be looking forward to seeing your articles on ESPN.com. Kevin Seifert talking to us more about the Vikings, and follow him, all season long? We got an exciting few months ahead of us.
Absolutely. I'll be here all year.
Exactly. Schedule release coming up.
Schedule release, OTAs. It's hard to keep the excitement down for
right?
that.
We'll be seeing you around here for sure.
Yep.